can blame him anyway.
You can blame me. Go ahead. That's fine. I don't mind being blamed. But
did anything happen on this day in history?
Did anything happen on this day? As a matter of fact. But yeah, well, welcome back. Today is July 20th, and since Ed asked, I wasn't going to do this, but since Ed asked, I was going to skip it this time, but Ed specifically asked. So what happened on this day, July 20th? Well, a lot of interesting things. First of all, talk over here to the empty side of the room today. It was on this date in 1054 that the Patriarch of Constantinople, Michael Carolarius, excommunicated Cardinal Humbert of Rome, who was the Pope's representative in Constantinople. And it's interesting is that the reason the Pope's representative was in Constantinople was to let Carolarius know that the Pope had excommunicated him. Okay, so he excommunicated them. So basically, this is the gist of, it's not the only event, but it's the gist of what is called the Great Schism in the church. So that we had, from this point on, we had the Eastern Church and we had the Western Church from this point on. So prior to this point, there had been three major, so Rome was not as significant because Rome was no longer the capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople was, but it was still one of the major sees. Okay, in the Catholic, the see, it was one of the major ones. There was Constantinople, there was Jerusalem, and then there was Rome. And so now suddenly you just had Constantinople on one side and you had Rome on the other. And this is a split that exists to this day. You have the Orthodox Church on one side and you have the Roman Catholic Church on the other. There's occasional forays from one side to the other where they, oh no, we're all together. But nobody on either side is saying, oh yes, we will become subservient, or we will look to the Pope as, nobody in the East is saying we will look to the Pope as our ultimate authority. But this 1054, that was it. This is one of the things. Today was the day in 1591 that Anne Hutchinson was baptized. Anne Hutchinson goes on to become one of the great thought leaders of the early colony era. In 1712, in England, the Riot Act was enacted. The Riot Act. This was an actual law based in 1712, and the gist of the Riot Act is that it's a statement, and that they would go out there and there would be a crowds assembling, and they would read this Riot Act. They would read the Riot Act to the crowd, and then they would give them an hour to disperse. And if you did not disperse, penalties could include death. Okay, so when have you ever heard the expression, oh, he read her the Riot Act? This is what it's from. So it's an actual law called the Riot Act, that when there were people, they'd go out there, they'd read them the Riot Act, and et cetera, et cetera. So in 1727, Jonathan Edwards marries Sarah Pierpont. Sarah Pierpont, they have children, their children have children, and one of their children becomes, let's see, grandfather, great-grandfather, I forget which one, but they had one of their grandchildren becomes the president of Harvard. One of their other grandchildren becomes Aaron Burr, the vice president, the one who shot and killed Alexander Hamilton. So that was their wedding day was on this date in 1727. And the big one, of course, where were you on this date in 1969? How many of you know where you were? 1969, on this date, 1969, July 20th, if you were like me, your parents let you stay up so that you could watch man land on the moon. So today is the day of the moon landing. So I remember, it's one of those weird things I remember as a kid. You have these odd memories of things. Remember that, oh, you need to stay up and watch this. So there we were, big old black and white TV, which is fine because that's all it was. There were no color pictures coming back. If you do see color pictures, they were faked. The whole moon landing was faked. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I didn't say that. That did not come from me. But yeah, that was on this date in 1969. 1969. So, all right. Today, I want to finish early today. Don't laugh. Don't laugh. All right, we are we are in 2 Samuel 15. I'm going to try and make it through the lesson today without hacking and coughing and all of that. Have to start with low end promises, kind of a low bar. That's kind of the goal. He coughs. All right.
Everybody else lots of questions.
Yeah. Okay. 2 Samuel 15. We're in 2 Samuel chapter 15. Previously, and we started with this again. Previously, David had committed adultery with Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, who was the son of Ahithophel the Gilonite, David's counselor. Okay, so part of our discussion today has to do with Ahithophel. Okay, Ahithophel, again, all we know about him at this point, actually, we don't know anything about him in the text. We don't know anything about him. And all we're told about him later on is that he was, Bathsheba's grandfather. And then last week, previously, David had left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. You remember David went out to the east, and Absalom is coming in from the west, from Hebron, coming towards Jerusalem. David is moving out towards the Jordan River. And he left 10 concubines there at the palace to take care of things, make sure the place stays clean up, keep the things, clean the sink, make sure the curtains get straightened out, that kind of stuff. Okay, and these concubines are interesting. Again, I've said, and I've told Debbie in my not so subtle hints. I'm like, I think there's a really good study on Samuel, the women of the book of Samuel, and I keep telling her that. So if you see her, ask her, when is that study on the women of the book of Samuel? But these 10 concubines would be one of the women, one of the group. It's a group. It's the only one where there's a group. John Walton, who is a guy, he's at Wheaton College and has written a lot, Old Testament Bible scholar, described them in one of his books as wives without a dowry. Okay, so it's like, what are these concubines? They're like wives without a dowry. So it's not like, it's a little bit above the idea of a mistress. What we think of a mistress today is, somebody who has a fling, has a flame, has some guy that they hang around with. And I don't know if you've been following the news, maybe they go to Coldplay concerts together, something along that line. But often, though not always, these are meant for reproduction. They get together. So, for example, one of the early examples of a concubine would be Hagar in the book of Genesis. You remember Sarah can't have children, and so she says, take my servant Hagar. And so Hagar becomes a concubine. Okay, there is a level of responsibility between the male and the concubine. And in Judges 19, the story of the Levite, we talked about it earlier when we were talking about Saul in First Samuel 8, I think it was, or 12. This is the Levite who had this concubine that he goes into Benjamin, and the people come around, and it's a story very similar to Sodom and Gomorrah. But in that passage, the Levite is referred to as the concubine's husband. Okay, so there is sort of a relationship, but still this is Old Testament biblical time. So the women at that time had very little agency. Okay, very little, and by agency I mean the right to make their own decisions. Okay, no doubt these were, somebody had come along and said, hey, I want to get into the king's good graces. Here, take this servant, take my daughter, take this woman that is in my possession. And so they were kind of just considered property to a certain extent. And that's one of the issues, when that study on women comes out, one of the things we're talking about, the agency of the women in Samuel here. So often, though not always, meant for reproduction. Okay, so, but that would be one of their main things. And so when you talk about having a harem, okay, this is something that becomes much more popular in the like with the Ottoman Empire. We see the idea of a harem, and again, it's there's a responsibility level. Okay, it's not just somebody that they get together with in secret. This is there's a responsibility level there. but they are still seen as the property of the male. Okay, that was really just all there was to it. We're going to get back to this point. I just sort of something in the background as we get up. Okay, so David in verse, let's see, 15:30, Absalom has stolen the hearts of the people. And we talked about how Absalom had created this movement by standing outside the gate for 4 years and questioning people, saying, "Who are you? Where are you from? What is your issue?" It's like, "Oh man, you really have a good point, and I would love to do something for you, but I am just not the guy because I'm not a judge." Every once in a while, you'll hear about a politician that uh, there's a couple of ways that somebody is running for office, right? Or a particular office, like, I don't know, president, because all of a sudden they just coincidentally happen to be making a lot of trips to the states that have, early primaries. Why is suddenly J.B. Pritzker making trips to New Hampshire? What has New Hampshire got? My mother grew up there, so I love New Hampshire. So, but why go to New Hampshire? Why go to Iowa? Really, why go to Iowa? Kidding. But I love Iowa, especially the exit signs. That's the best thing about Iowa. I'm kidding, you Iowa people. But why go there? Well, because you're running. And another thing is they do a listening tour. You ever heard that phrase? So and so's on a listening tour. And this is what Absalom is doing. He's listening. He's, oh yes, Tim, I know you. I really want to be your king. And if I were king, I would get you a shirt that came with an off switch. I would do that for you. But I can't because I'm not the king. If only I were the king. And people think, and Colleen is thinking, man, I wish you were the king because this shirt's got to go, kind of thing. I'm not making fun of your shirt. The fun's already there. I'm just enjoying it, kind of. But be that as it may, and so he stole the hearts of the people. And I'm guessing what happened is after Absalom would just say, "Oh, if I were king, you would get what you want," and the people would not get what they want, because otherwise, why would they care? Because they would say, "Well, Absalom said, and I went and I talked to the king and I got what I wanted, so I don't really need Absalom." So the only way that works is if they're not getting what they want from the king. And so Absalom is out there stealing the hearts of the people. He arranges a big meeting in Hebron, which happens to be where David first was anointed king. Absalom is king in Israel, and all the big boom, and suddenly everybody is turning to Absalom, and David tells his people to flee. And so he's leaving there. Let's see, where didn't surely the Lord list? Verse 30, but David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. All the people with him covered their heads too, and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. Okay, so there he was advised that Ahithophel has become Absalom's counselor. Now, Ahithophel is like, okay, why, why would this guy suddenly turn? Well, there's two things, of course. On the one hand, you could say that he's mad that David killed his granddaughter's husband, that he committed adultery with her, that he's upended and ruined that family in many ways. So maybe this is his way of getting revenge. It suggests to me that at this point, it's not really known that Solomon is going to be the next king, although we don't know. It's speculation here. Like at some point, it becomes clear that Solomon is going to be the next king. I mean, Solomon is, when Nathan comes in and talks about the baby, there's sort of intimations that that's going to happen. It's not clear because Solomon would be Ahithophel's great grandson. So, why would he work against himself? So I don't think it's quite known. Regardless, he's worried because Ahithophel is a really super sharp guy. Okay, I'm just going to leave it there right now. But Ahithophel is like a really, really sharp guy. And in every political administration, there's one or two, really sharp guys. And one of the jobs of the newspaper and the media is to kind of figure out who that is. It's if you follow again, You haven't noticed yet. I follow presidential politics. It's like some people watch football. I follow presidential politics. Okay. The one of the things that it's just assumed that if you're not in an election season, then the name of the game in the journalistic world is to kind of figure out, okay, who's actually making the decisions, who's behind that decision. It's never quite assumed that the person in front is the one actually making decisions. And every once in a while, you'll find out about a guy who was really super, super influential. I mean, one example would be Henry Kissinger, who was never president, somebody who was super influential in within any particular presidential administration. Okay, and Ahithophel was a great counselor, super sharp guy, and it's like, oh man. So there's two problems there. One, if these super sharp counselors are going over to the other side, then David is like, wait a minute, maybe being my advisor wasn't as big a deal as I thought it was. And the other way to look at it, another problem with that is if he says, well, if he's going over, who's going to stay? You know, so he's advised, but at that point, he prays. The Lord prays, turn his counsel into foolishness. Turn his counsel into foolishness, and we're going to kind of see that how almost immediately the Lord provides the means by which that prayer is going to be answered. It's kind of interesting. I suppose there's a lesson there. I don't want to go spiritualizing the text that, you're praying for a situation and, he opens his eyes and boom, he meets Hushai, another one of his counselors. Okay. When David arrived at the summit, this is verse 32, where people used to worship God, Hushai the Archite was there to meet him, his robe torn and dust on his head. These are, of course, indications of being in great sorrow. Hushai, another very wise counselor, clearly supporting David, clearly distraught at the fact that David is not, has been removed from his kingdom. David said to him, if you go with me, you will be a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, Your Majesty, I will be your servant. I was your father's servant in the past, but now I will be your servant. Then you can help me by frustrating Ahithophel's advice. Now remember, we said David is down, but he's not out. Okay? He's got some plans working. If you remember, he told the priest Zadok to take the ark back to Jerusalem. And then he said, I'm going to go there and you send your sons. And now the sons come back up again. Here he says, won't the priest Zadok and Abiathar be there with you? Tell them anything you hear in the king's palace. Their two sons, Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, and Jonathan, son of Abiathar, are there with them. Send them to me with anything you hear. So David's got men on the inside. Okay, he's got people inside there, because of course, the priests are going to, one of the things that Absalom needs to do is he needs to centralize the worship. So the people are going to want to see him as the spiritual leader. Remember earlier we have references to Absalom sacrificing in Hebron. That's what he tells David he's going to do. Okay, so the people need to see Absalom as a spiritual leader. So David knows that Absalom needs the approval of the priest, and so he knows he's going to run up against Zadok, and Zadok is going to see things going on, and he's got a messenger. He's got to weigh in. Okay, and he tells Hushai, okay, you're going to see the political side. Zadok's going to see the religious side. You're going to see the political side. You see anything, you call me, you tell me, send me a text by way of these two guys, and we'll be good. Okay. So he was advised that Ahithophel had gone over to the summit of the Mount of Olives. David meets Hushai. He advises Hushai to go back to Absalom with Zadok and Abiathar. So Hushai, verse 37, David's confidant, arrived at Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. And so again, I think that Absalom is coming in one side of the city and Hushai is coming in the other, right about at the same time. Or maybe they both walked in at the same, to the door at the same time. It doesn't matter. They both get there at the same time. So chapter 16. When David had gone a short distance beyond the summit, there was Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth. Okay, now we've met Ziba before, okay, and we're going to meet Ziba again. Okay, Ziba, the steward of Mephibosheth. If you remember back, just after David had become king and had solidified, had made, put all the rebellion's down and was solidly in the kingdom, he says, is there not a descendant of Saul that I can bless for Jonathan's sake? And they call Ziba, that somebody knows about Ziba, and Ziba says, well, there is this one crippled son, Mephibosheth. Okay, now Ziba was Saul's steward, so he was somebody who was very high up in the organization of Saul's household. If you remember in Genesis, going back to Genesis, Abraham didn't have an heir, so his steward was going to be his heir. It's one of the reasons why he needed to have an heir. So this is a very highly ranked person. And David goes to Ziba then. He says, where is this Mephibosheth guy? Oh, he's over there. Go get him. Go get him. And then he says, once Mephibosheth comes in, David gives everything that was Saul's to Mephibosheth. And he says, Mephibosheth, you're going to eat at my table. And Ziba, you got to take care of all of this stuff for Mephibosheth. Okay? Now, how that went over, we don't know. Although there are some interesting indications here that, maybe Ziba wasn't quite on board with that idea. Because look what he says. The steward of Mephibosheth, waiting to meet him. He had a string of donkeys saddled and loaded with 200 loaves of bread, 100 cakes of raisins, 100 cakes of figs, and a skin of wine. I like that. I want a skin of wine. It's going to be my new thing. Would you like a skin of wine? Just have people look at you weird. But because that never ever happens to me ever. People never look at me weird, as you all look at me weird. A skin of wine. The king asked Ziba, why have you brought these? Okay, so again, this is not remember, he meets Abigail. He was going to go in and Abigail comes in with a bunch of food, and this is Ziba's doing the same thing here. He says, why have you brought these? Ziba answered, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and fruit are for the men to eat, and the wine is to refresh those who have become exhausted in the wilderness. So Ziba clearly is trying to, curry favor with David. Just like Abigail was trying to assuage David from killing off Nabal and all of that. So he's clearly trying to get on David's good side. And David asks the obvious question. Where is your master's grandson? Kept in verse 3, where is your master's grandson? This would be Saul's grandson. Where is Mephibosheth? Okay. He says, where is Mephibosheth? Ziba said to him, he is staying in Jerusalem because he thinks today the Israelites will restore me to my grandfather's kingdom. Okay. David asks, where is your master's grandson? And then Ziba says that Mephibosheth has gone over to Absalom. Okay. So this is essentially what he's saying. Now, this is interesting. Go back to what we've talked about throughout this text. How do you know whether something is true or not? Okay, so what we know about this is either true or Ziba wants David to believe this. Okay, all we know is that Ziba said this. Okay, so again, when you talk about how do you know in a narrative text what is actually true, well, the narrator will tell you. So the narrator is not telling us that Mephibosheth went over. Okay, Ziba's telling us that. The narrator is just quoting Ziba saying this. Okay, now why would Ziba do this? Why would Ziba lie about Mephibosheth? Well, what does David do? The king said in verse 4, the king said to Ziba, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. Not a bad return. One little statement. Maybe true, maybe not true. Okay. I humbly bow, Ziba said. May I find favor in your eyes, my lord the king. Now, why would Mephibosheth not be there? Well, as you may recall, Mephibosheth is disabled, crippled. Okay, it's not as easy for Mephibosheth to get around, okay, as it is for Ziba to get around. Does Ziba see an opportunity to gain back something here? Perhaps. Okay, so it's all we know. Again, we don't just. I say that because as we talk about this passage, I was kind of going down memory lane. And I was. Does anybody know who Jack Hyles was? So I kind of grew up in the shadow of Jack Hyles. He was the pastor of the First Baptist Church of Hammond. My pastor of my church had grown up in Jack Hyles' church, and so a lot of what we did was kind of tied into stuff that Hiles was doing and all that kind of stuff. And I'll mention this a couple of times, but and have you ever had that experience where you think of something from your childhood, and it's been a long time. It's been a long time since many of us had a childhood. Um, you know, unless you're like me and have just been enjoying your second childhood or third or fourth. What number am I on now, dear? And it's kind of thing. And so you decide to revisit it, and you go back and do it like it's a movie you remember watching as a kid. Maybe this happened. You remember this movie as a kid. Oh, that was a great film. I remember watching that movie. That was such a good movie. And then 30, 40 years later, you go, I'm going to watch that movie. And so you sit down and you start watching that movie. And as you're watching that movie, you think to yourself, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. Right? I like this? Heck, has that ever happened? Okay, you don't have to admit that happened to you. But I remember hearing a sermon once that Jack Hiles preached about this passage, this whole story, and I thought it turned out that there's like a couple of websites that have hundreds of Jack Hiles sermons on them, and a lot of his books that are available. And so it was fascinating. And I don't know that I found the actual sermon, but I did find one sermon about this, and I was disappointed because again he just starts, in this particular text he just starts blasting Mephibosheth in this text, and I'm like, Jack, you don't know whether Mephibosheth has actually gone over or not. You can't just leap because the guy said it. Okay, but regardless, there'll be more on Jack later. He told a story. He told a story in one of his sermons, and this is, maybe I'll edit this part out, but he told a story, and it gets into one of my little pet peeves about illustrations in sermons, and especially historical illustrations. Okay, when people say, "Oh, this happened in history" or something, and they tell some story, some life, and basically it comes down to this: the more perfect the illustration is, the more likely it is to be, what's the word I'm looking for? False. Okay. And so Jack Hiles tells this long story. Okay, this long story about Thomas Paine. Okay, you remember Thomas Paine, Common Sense, Revolutionary War guy. He tells this long story about Thomas Paine in a church, and then the what's the punchline of the sermon is that somebody, Thomas Paine was somebody who was he wasn't an atheist. He was more of an agnostic, sort of like a Jeffersonian agnostic. But he in the course of this story, he dares God to strike him down, and then somebody in the audience starts singing the song stand up for Jesus." And so this is great. The crowd joins up and they all stand up singing stand up for Jesus. And this is how Thomas Paine got shut down. Right? It's a great story. It just perfectly fits. See, the problem is Thomas Paine died like 20 years before the guy who wrote stand up for Jesus was born. Okay? And I'm thinking, there's no way that happened. I'm like, yeah. This is why, whenever you're preaching, it's best to just use your own personal stories, things that happen in your own life, because it's really hard for people to prove them wrong. Not impossible. It's not impossible. Prove, harder to, and especially, again, when there's a sermon, again, anytime I hear a sermon and I hear it, and Pastor Jared is not guilty of this, not yet at least, I don't know. But where I hear a sermon of some historical that just perfectly fits the point, I'm like, okay, that's probably didn't happen, kind of thing. But be that as it may, so Ziba comes in and says, "Hey, oh, this is for you. I'm just giving this to you because you're my king," etc. Mephibosheth, yeah, well, he gave it, and David buys it. Okay, why? I don't know. Maybe David is just not in a not in a mood to deal with somebody who could possibly be a contestant to the throne. Okay, and Mephibosheth could be. He's dealing with one rebellion. He doesn't need another one from the Saul's family right now. Maybe he's like, okay, just take everything, kind of thing. And of course, you could also say that maybe David thinks, I don't have the power anyway. So, here, go ahead, take everything. Okay. So, where did I go here? Then the king said, as King David comes along, I'm in verse 5 now. So at the summit, David believes Ziba and gives him everything he had given to Mephibosheth. As David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came from there. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. Okay, so David and his people are walking, and there's this guy Shimei who's of the same clan as Saul. So this is a little bit closer relationship than simply being of Benjamin. Okay, he's a closer relative. Maybe he's a cousin. Maybe he's, I don't know what, but he's a slightly closer relative of Saul. Somebody who is still upset that David took over from Saul. So again, as we go through this, we realize that there's still people for a very long time that are not convinced that David should be the right king. Okay, I mean, we kind of think that once David gets to be the king, that everything's fine and nobody questions. Like, no, this guy is very clearly on Saul's side. Okay. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, or all the troops, so he's surrounded. As he cursed, Shimei said, get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. Okay, now, who is David killed of Saul's family? Okay, well, we don't know that he's killed anybody from Saul's family. We do know that he killed Uriah and all of the people that were around Uriah. There's something we tend to forget. Uriah was put into the thick of the battle, but Uriah wasn't the only one. So if you remember the story of Uriah, that he sends a group, including Uriah, up to the wall, and then everybody backs out, and then Uriah dies, and several others die as well. Okay, and so he's, your murderer kind of thing. Okay, the Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer. Okay, he's not wrong, and David knows it. Okay, about his being a murderer. And he knows that this has all come about because Nathan told him it was going to come about. Okay. Enter Abishai. Remember Abishai? Okay. Abishai is David's nephew. He is Joab's brother. He's one of the sons of Zeruiah. David's at one point, can't remember if it's before or after this, where David just says in kind of an exasperation that you sons of Zeruiah, I can't deal with you guys. Okay, and he's one of them. And if you remember when David was running from Saul, the first time they catch Saul in the cave, and the second time they find Saul in a field, and he's lying there, and it's David. It says, "Who's going to come with me?" And Abishai says, "I'll go with you." And so they sneak down into the camp. Everybody's asleep. They sneak down into the camp, and now it's David and Abishai standing over a sleeping Saul. And what does Abishai say at that moment? Does anybody remember? Let me kill him. I will run him through. So the Abishai, he's willing. You got to give him, he's got the enthusiasm. I am willing to do this to you. And so David, let's see. Finally, David meets Shimei, a fairly close relative of Saul. He pelts David with stones. I just say he pelted him with stones. Pelts him with stones and curses him, suggesting that David is being punished for his crimes against Saul's kingship. Abishai, David's nephew, offers to kill Shimei. This is not the first time Abishai has made this kind of offer. David again declines. Okay, but the king said, what does this have to do with you, you son of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? So again, this is one of those kind of deals where, whether David feels he's rightly or wrongly, whatever his situation is, he knows that Shimei is at least partly right. Okay. And he knows that this is part of the curse. And so, if anything, Shimei is just reminding him of what Nathan the prophet had told him. He's just kind of filling in the blanks. He goes, hey, remember when, he could have just come, remember when Nathan said this? Well, hey, look, that's what's happening to you. Okay. If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, curse David, who can ask why do this? So David is just like feeling a little guilty here at this point, I think. And this is why. David then said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, my own flesh and blood is trying to kill me. I've got bigger problems right now than this nut job. Okay. So I get it. He's annoying, but let's not make matters worse. Okay. I've already, David, maybe in his head he's thinking, listen, I've already killed people unnecessarily. Okay. let's not make it worse. It may be, and my son, etc., leave him alone, let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore to me his covenant blessing instead of his curse today. Okay, so maybe this is David recognizing, again, kind of, maybe it's at this point he's in his mind he's writing Psalm 139, or Psalm 51, I was shapen in iniquity and sin did my mother conceive me, or maybe this is where he's thinking of these, and he's got this guy reminding him of that, So, I'm not saying that Shemaiah is right, but every once in a while you need someone like that to say, hey, don't forget, why you're in this mess, sort of thing. I read an article today in Christian Century magazine. It was a column, and Christian Century is kind of a progressive, read liberal. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but Christian magazine. And this particular writer in there said that the left, the Christian left, such as it is, has kind of lost, needs to reclaim the idea of talking about sin. Okay, he said, we've reacted against the fundamentalist side where people would preach, oh, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do this, and the guy is saying, these are bad things. We we should do this, so we should say you shouldn't, and he's dealing specifically with gambling is kind of his big thing that he talks about. He says, gambling is a bad thing. I mean, he gets, he's kind of waffling in there, but he's saying we need to be reminding people that, hey, these are bad things. So maybe that's Shimei's role, is to kind of think, lest David get too, weeping as he goes, lest David get too involved and feeling sorry for himself. Shimei is there to say, let's remember why you're here. Okay, let's not lose track of what happened here. Okay, whose fault this whole thing is. Okay. Now, again, I'm not saying somebody needs to be walking around hectoring people who are going through hard times. But I mean, sometimes it's like, it's like if you're dealing with somebody who's an alcoholic, maybe it's sometimes you go, hey, maybe you need to dial back the drinking, as in like cut it out, instead of just saying, okay, I'll take you to the hospital for your next kidney transplant or liver, whatever. Maybe it's like, why don't you do something here too? Okay. Again, at the risk of spiritualizing the text, I say that. So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along the hillside opposite, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. It's kind of like an interesting way to approach your new place. So if we ever do a play here in church again, if we ever do play, I want to be Shimei. I don't want to be David. I want to be the one standing up on a hill throwing clods of dirt. And that would be kind of a fun role to be. Gene, you want to be that too? Gene, me and Gene, we're going to be Shimei's family up there throwing dirt clods up at whoever. Maybe we're hoping that Tim will be David and we'll be covering his shirt. Kind of. Sorry. Okay. The king and all the people with him arrived at their destination exhausted, and there he refreshed himself. So he finally gets to a safe place. And one text, I can't remember which one it is, either the Septuagint says that he gets over to the Jordan. Okay, so he's like at the Jordan River, or he's on the other side of the Jordan River, and that's where he stops. Okay, so he's there. All right. So David is like out of Jerusalem. For all practical purposes, he's out of the country. He's stopped. He's refreshed. He's waiting for himself. And we transfer back to Jerusalem. Okay, in chapter 15. Meanwhile, Absalom and all the men of Israel came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with them. So again, because Ahithophel had gone to Absalom when he was in Hebron, now he comes in. And again, this is sort of part of his, hey, look, I've got this great counselor who was a great counselor for my dad. He's with me now, so it's sort of a legitimacy thing for him. Absalom, then Hushai the Archite, David's confidant, went to Absalom and said to him, long live the king, long live the king. Okay, so when you're Absalom and your position is tentative, And if you follow anything about kings, and most of what I know about English kings comes from Shakespeare's plays, which is moderately reliable, and that's with like a small m, moderately reliable. But when you've taken over a kingdom, when you've usurped the kingdom, when you've deposed a king, your position is pretty tentative. Okay, it's kind of tentative, and you're kind of trying to um, you know solidify your thing. And somebody walks in and says, looks at you and says, "Long live the king." You think, "Oh, great, he recognizes me." But interestingly, everybody kind of notices that Hushai does not say, "Long live King Absalom." Okay, he says, "Long live the king." So people are wondering, and we know that Hushai is working for David. So in Hushai's mind, who is the king? David. What's his goal there? His goal there is to make sure that David returns as king. So I don't think it's stretching too far to say when Hushai says, "Long live the king," he's not talking about Absalom. Absalom, of course, he hears it. He hears what he wants to hear. Okay. Um, so we're on the back page of our handout here. Meanwhile, Absalom, along with Ahithophel, entered Jerusalem. Hushai meets with Absalom and says, "Long live the king." And the question there is, what king is Hushai referring to? Now, I think he's referring to David. Now, you can take however you want because we don't really know, but it just sort of makes sense. Absalom said to Hushai, he sees Hushai, he hears what Hushai has to say. Absalom knows that Hushai is one of David's counselors. And he knows that Ahithophel is one of David's counselors too. But it's an interesting question. Absalom smells something wrong. He's not a complete idiot here, okay? He says, Absalom says something is wrong, and he asks him, "So this is the love you show your friend?" And the word love there is the word hesed, that loving kindness. It's like, is this how you treat your friends? Kind of like he just recognizes something's not right here. It's like you were really close with David, and now you're here. Is this, and of course Hushai's response, "No, the one chosen by the Lord, by these people and by all the men of Israel, his I will be, and I will remain with him." Now again, which one was chosen by the Lord? Interestingly, there's no record of any anointing ceremony. The text doesn't tell us. Doesn't mean he didn't have one, but the text doesn't tell us about any anointing ceremony. So who's the only king in town or in the area that's been anointed, chosen by the Lord? Well, it's David. Okay, but Absalom hears what he wants to hear. Okay, I'm sure we've all had that happen. But he says, "His I will be, and I will remain. Furthermore, whom should I serve? Should I not serve the son? Just as I served your father, so I will serve you." Okay, so he says, no, I'm here to serve you. Okay, I'm here to serve you. I'm here to serve you because you are here and I'm here to serve. So I don't know how long this thing, but you kind of get the idea that Ahithophel is standing there. Maybe Ahithophel is the one going, "Hey, there's something not right with this." And I don't know. Again, I'm just speculating. But Hushai convinces Absalom, "Hey, I'm here to help, man. I know which side is the winning side," kind of thing. There's a scene in one of Shakespeare's plays, one of his Henry VI plays, which are the most difficult plays to see, in case you keep track of these sort of things. See the Henry VI plays done individually. So there's 3 of them: Henry VI, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. One time in all of our Shakespeare plays, one time. It's like, I think it's the only play we've only seen once. Maybe, right? Have we seen? I think so. It's the only ones that we've only seen once. Okay, because we've seen they put them together a lot. They make a conglomeration, they edit them down. So we saw one 8-hour version, we saw a 6-hour version, we've seen a couple of other different versions, but to see Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, very, very rare. That's free, that won't be on your test. But there's one scene where in one of those plays, I forget which one it is, but where there's a guy that's just going back and forth. There's this meeting, and he says, "Okay, I'm on your side." And the person says, "Well, if you're going to be on my side, then these are generals, and there's the kings. I'm going to be on your side." And "Well, if you're going to be on my side, you have to do this." And he says, "Well, I'm not going to do that, so I'm going to go back over here. I'm going to be on your side." And he says, well, if you're going to be on my side, you got to do this. And they go, okay, well, I'm going to go back over here. And it's just kind of the guy just goes back and forth a couple of times. You're like, really, seriously? Kind of, this was how it was. I guess so. Shakespeare said it. I'm not going to question it. Whom should I serve? Should I not serve the Son? Just as I served your father, so I will serve you. Okay, so Hushai has gotten himself in. He's accepted, right? So Absalom said to Ahithophel, and this is what we're going to close with this little anecdote here. Hushai reassures Absalom, saying, I only support the king chosen by the Lord, by these people, which people, and all the men of Israel. Okay. Absalom accepts Hushai, and he turns to Ahithophel in verse 20. Absalom said to Ahithophel, give us your advice. What should we do? Now what? All right, here I am. I'm in Jerusalem. What do I need to do? Right? Now, there's no record that Hushai weighs in on this. Why? I don't know. Does he? Maybe he's like, okay, I need to just kind of sit back, be quiet for a while, see how this thing all falls together. And my thinking is that's what he does. So Ahithophel answered in verse 21, sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Okay, that's just sort of an odd thing to say. Sleep with your father's concubines. The 10 concubines that we talked about earlier, Ahithophel's advice is you need to go sleep with all of these 10 women. Okay, how does he do that? I don't know. Okay, is it 10 days? Was it 1 day? Is this guy some sort of an athlete? I don't know. Whatever. But he says, go sleep with your father's concubines. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father. Because remember, we were going back into the first part of 2 Samuel. What happens between Ishbosheth and Abner? Ishbosheth believes that Abner has slept with one of his concubines. Okay? And this is a blow up. This causes the rift. It's like you just don't do that because the concubine is the property of the king. Okay, if I went over to Ed and I said, Ed, guess, opens up his garage and he sees my car in his garage. Ed would say, why is your car in my garage? Oh, well, I needed a place to put it. Now, Ed wouldn't mind, of course. How many believe that? No. But what is your car doing in my garage? This is my garage. You can't just move your car into my garage. I said, well, it's mine now because my car's in it. There would be words. There would be a discussion. Okay. Ed would find somebody and he would come to me 2 by 2, and then I'd be in front of the church and I would say, no, it's my, that's Ed's property. I can't just move my car into the garage, his garage. I can't just pick up your stuff and use it however I want because that's your property, right? We all understand that. No, we don't understand here at this time, in this era, these concubines were David's property. And for Absalom to say, you know what? How do you stake ownership of a concubine? Well, you sleep with them. So, okay. And everybody knows that David has left these concubines. Everybody knows that they're David's concubines. And so I'm guessing there's this huge thing because look what he does. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Okay? This is kind of an interesting thing. I mean, they've got bedrooms. Okay, why pitch a tent on the roof? Well, there's 2 things. Well, first of all, he wants to make sure everybody sees what's going on. Now, again, I don't know whether there's a parade, whether there's a ceremony, whatever, but he wants everybody to see what's going on. And the ironic thing is, it's an assumption, okay, but we assume that if Absalom is coming to Jerusalem, where would he go? He would go to the palace because that's where kings go, right? What roof are we talking about? We're talking about the roof of the palace. What else happened on that roof?
David took a walk in the middle of the night.
David is out there looking into on top of other people's roofs. Does Absalom know that? Maybe. I'm guessing Ahithophel does. Okay. So Absalom says, okay, The things I have to do, I'll go up there and do it. So he goes up there and he sleeps with these 10 concubines. Okay, and this is a very public way of letting everybody know, hey, there's a new boss in town. I am in charge here. I have taken over the palace. Everything that was David's is now mine. Everybody will see this. Everybody will know this. Okay, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. So I don't know. I mean, is there a crowd down there cheering him on? I don't know what's going on. It just he's got the tent up there, and there's all this. I mean, just in the sight of all Israel. How is this working? I don't know. Okay, why does he do this? Okay, and it's interesting. He says something. This is the only discussion we have of Ahithophel. It's just now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. So these guys really, and again, I mean, what he says here about the concubines makes sense. Okay, what he says about the concubines makes sense, and it does the trick. Okay, it accomplishes what he wanted it to accomplish. Okay, but he says he slept with his father. Now in those days, Now in those days, the advice Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. What's interesting is again what the narrator is telling you. This is how he was treated. He was treated like that of one who inquires of God. Okay, so the narrator is not telling you that Ahithophel inquired of God and gave God's counsel. Okay, it's just Ahithophel was so persuasive, so wise that, wow, this is, and there can be wise people that are not Christians. Quite a few, a lot of them. I remember when I went to the University of Illinois for a while, and I took a class. It was a graduate history class. I know that comes as a shock to several of you. The more I know about the history, the more I know don't tell stories in sermons using history. But it was a history and development of Puritan thought. Okay, and I remember this guy, and I had come from, I can't remember the name of the school in South Carolina I'd gone to, but I had come through Christian education, Christian high school, Christian college, and then here I am at the University of Illinois. And this guy is talking about the history and development of Puritan thought. Now we're talking like Jonathan Edwards and all of those guys, okay? And this guy was so eloquent about what they believed, what they were thinking, and all of that, and he could quote the Bible verses. And there was no indication to me at the time that this guy was a believer at all. But I remember thinking at the time, it's just how naive I was at that point. I just remember thinking, how do you know this stuff? How can you know so much about the Bible? How can you know so much about what these Puritans think? And, I thought that was our information, kind of thing, But he was like one that had inquired of God. He knew more than a lot of pastors and Christian teachers I've had. Okay, I don't know. Maybe the guy was a believer. He might have been, but still, it's like when they look at this guy Ahithophel, he's like one that inquired of God. And so both David and Absalom felt that way. So when Ahithophel says, "Hey, go sleep with these 10 women," okay, did they look at it as an oracle? I don't know. They did. They followed him, kind of thing. That is how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. And so you got to understand why David is like upset. He says, Lord, turn his advice to foolishness, kind of thing. In chapter 17, next week, we'll start talking about what happens. So Ahithophel and Hushai clash. Okay, there's a discussion between the two of them, and we'll see what they have to say. Then we are not done with the 10 concubines. Okay, we are not done with them. They come back, and it's not a happy ending. To me, it's not a happy ending, but we'll talk more about them later. Any questions? Just wanted to say for the record, I am done before.
Both David and Absalom
Feel this way. Absalom does this because Ahithophel's advice was like that of one who inquires of God. Both David and Absalom feel this way. So a tent is placed on the roof, and Absalom proceeds to sleep with all 10 of his concubines. In Leviticus 20:11, I'm getting to that. If you'd stay here the whole time instead of bailing out. says, so a tent is pitched on the palace roof, and Absalom proceeds to sleep with all 10. Leviticus 20 is just a verse that says, if you sleep with your father's wife, you're worthy of death. Okay, so it's like, oh, okay, well, it's interesting. And what did Nathan say? Nathan said when he said, from out of your house, he's going to take your wives. Okay, and here it is. Here it's happening. Okay, I'm assuming Bathsheba and Abigail and all the rest are with David, but the 10 concubines that David left, he's, again, David has a responsibility for them. This is kind of a husband-wife sort of relationship. Again, we don't, we kind of think about that marriage then was just like marriage is now. It's not. Okay, I mean, it's a lot of similarities. Don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of other things involved. So, any questions? Anything? Just again, I wanted to point out that I am actually done early. Not quite as early as I thought I was going to be done, but am I ever done as early as I thought I was going to be done? No. I like your shirt, by the way. In case you didn't pick up on that, it's, we make fun of those things we actually like, secretly like. No, I'm just. So, any questions? All right, thank you very much, and I'll see you. Oh wait, next week I won't be here. Enrique will. We're going to go to the Illinois Shakespeare Festival because I have to keep up with my kings and all of that kind of stuff. So we're going to be at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, and then also coming up on August 10th, which is quicker than you think. On August 10th, there's going to be a thing. another thing. I forget. It's a training. It's a training. If only I knew somebody who was attached to what's going on around here. I think it's
That's your wife.
For
She
the
knows what's
youth,
going on.
for the equip people involved in workers, right?
There's something, but they want to do it. I think they want to do it in here, or they want everybody involved in that, whether or not you're a part, just in case, So I'll let you tell you more like first week of August.
Like I said, ask your wife. She knows what's going on.
She does. Well, she just tells me that stuff on a need to know basis.
Ah.
Kind of stuff. So all right. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.